Good morning, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to welcome you all to this highly anticipated awareness seminar. Before we begin with the introductions of our special guests of honor, allow me to provide a brief overview of the initiative that brings us together today. Install Africa. Install Africa, the Innovation, Science and Technology for Action Learning in Africa, is the result of collaborative efforts initiated in October 2023. This initiative leverages the Drosophila melanogaster fly model and state-of-the-art infrastructure to enhance fundamental research capacity in Rwanda. Rwanda has made remarkable strides in advancing its scientific capabilities, recognizing the pivotal role of research in sustainable development and public health. Install Africa was born from a collaboration between the Foresight Institute of Research and Translation, Rwanda, FIRAT Rwanda, and its technical partner, DROS Africa UK, in conjunction with key national institutions such as the National Council for Science and Technology, Rwanda Biomedical Center, the National Industrial Research and Development Agency, the University of Rwanda, and the Rwanda Food and Drug Authority. This collaboration embarks on a 5-year comprehensive capacity development plan aimed at cultivating the next generation of scientists and fostering research excellence across medical, applied, and fundamental sciences. From healthcare innovation to agricultural production, this partnership envisions driving progress in public health and sustainable development across Rwanda and beyond. It is against this background that we convene today, united in our shared commitment to advancing science, technology, and public health for the benefit of our communities. With that foundation laid, I am now delighted to introduce our special guests of honor, whose presence today underscores the importance of this endeavor. Today, we are privileged to have with us an exceptional panel of leaders, experts, and visionaries who have made remarkable contributions in their respective fields. Allow me to introduce our esteemed special guests of honor. First, we are honored to welcome Professor Abraham Mitike, the Principal of the College of Medicine and Health Sciences, University of Rwanda. Professor Mitike's leadership in medical education and research has been a beacon of progress in the healthcare sector. Next, we have Dr. Eugene Mutimura, the Executive Secretary of the National Council for Science and Technology. Dr. Mutimura has been at the forefront of advancing science and technology policies that shape Rwanda's development. Joining us as well is Professor Claude Muvunyi, the Director General of Rwanda Biomedical Center. His dedication to strengthening public health systems has profoundly impacted the nation. We are also privileged to have Dr. Sekamo, the Director General of National Industrial Research and Development. Dr. Sekamo's work in fostering industrial innovation and development is truly commendable. Another distinguished guest is Professor Emile Bienvenu, the Director General of the Rwanda Food and Drug Agency. Professor Bienvenu's contributions to ensuring the safety and quality of food and drugs in Rwanda are invaluable. It is an honor to welcome Professor Leon Mutesa, a professor of human genetics at the College of Medicine and Health Sciences, University of Rwanda. Professor Leon Mutesa's pioneering research in genetics continues to break new ground in understanding human health. We also have Dr. Dieudonné Mutangana, the head of the Department of Biological Science at CST University of Rwanda. Dr. Mutangana's expertise in biological sciences has been instrumental in academic and research excellence. Finally, we are delighted to introduce Professor Janine Kondo, the CEO of the Center for Impact, Innovation, and Capacity Building for Health Information Systems and Nutrition, CIICHIN. Professor Kondo's leadership in health innovation and nutrition has made a lasting impact locally and globally. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause to our special guests of honor, whose presence graces this important seminar. Next, we will move on to narrating the profile of our invited guest speaker.
When we talk about the future of healthcare in Africa, one name stands out: Dr. Murtala Jibril. A distinguished scientist, public health expert, and vaccine development specialist, Dr. Jibril has spent his career at the critical intersection of research, policy, and public health intervention, working tirelessly to transform immunization efforts across the continent. His academic journey is as impressive as his impact, earning an MBBS from Bayero University, Kano, an MSc in clinical pharmacology from the University of Aberdeen, a PhD in immunology and vaccine development from the University of Manchester, and now pursuing an MPH in epidemiology. But beyond degrees, his work speaks volumes. As an R&D expert for vaccines, medicines, and health technologies at Africa CDC, Dr. Jibril is instrumental in advancing Africa's vaccine manufacturing capabilities and strengthening pharmaceutical research. As the West African regional focal person for the Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVM, he is at the forefront of a historic mission, ensuring that by 2040, Africa produces 60% of its vaccines locally. His expertise in vaccine safety, clinical trials, regulatory affairs, and health security has been honed through experience with WHO, Palladium International Development, and Georgetown Global Health Nigeria. But Dr. Jibril's impact doesn't stop at policy and research. As a former senior lecturer and sub-dean at Bayero University, Kano, he has mentored the next generation of healthcare professionals, shaping minds in clinical pharmacology, vaccinology, and immunology. He is also a respected thought leader in global health, frequently called upon to deliver high-level lectures and engage in strategic policy dialogues with institutions like Africa CDC, UNICEF, and WHO. His contributions have earned him recognition from esteemed professional bodies such as the American Society for Microbiology, the British Pharmacological Society, and the Bactivac Network. More than just a scientist, Dr. Jibril is a visionary leader committed to Africa's self-reliance in pharmaceutical innovation and healthcare equity. His relentless dedication to immunization, infectious disease control, and cutting-edge research makes him not just an expert in his field, but a force driving Africa toward a healthier, more self-sufficient future. And today, we have the privilege of hearing from him directly. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Murtala Jibril. Dr. Jibril, the floor is yours.
Good morning, colleagues. The topic for our discussion today is something that is very much dear to my heart. Issues around fundamental research and innovation. Before we begin, let me give you a quick scenario. If you have two companies or two institutions that claim to be manufacturing, let's say, a car, and then institution A is able to produce a lot of raw materials that are used to manufacture the car, and then assemble the car into its final product, and then another institution B that import all the raw materials and just assemble. I think you will agree with me that institution A is having more ownership of the technology, is having more sustainable approach, and also is having more economic impact than institution B. Now, basic research or fundamental research is the cornerstone of sustainable development and economic transformation. If you want to have a sustainable development and a big impact in economic transformation, we need to invest in the basic research, which is also termed as translational research. Now, as a sort of definition, what is innovation? Innovation, according to the Oxford Dictionary, refer to the introduction of new things, ideas, or ways of doing something, or a new idea, way of doing something, etc., that has been introduced or discovered. As I mentioned earlier, innovation is the cornerstone of sustainable development and economic transformation. Looking at fundamental research is the type of scientific investigation that aims to expand the general knowledge and the understanding of phenomena. It is driven by curiosity and desire to explore how things work. Other terms for fundamental research include basic research or basic sciences, biomedical research or biomedical sciences, theoretical research, bench research, and discovery science. So why it is important when we talk about fundamental research? The first is that it generates the fundamental knowledge that fuels technological breakthrough, foster scientific discovery. Now, we all know that fundamental research generates theories, new theories, principles, and models that forms basis of scientific and technological advancement. And many global innovations, including the internet, the GPS, the mRNA vaccine platforms, originated from decades of basic research. Africa requires a similar foundational investment to make meaningful contributions to emerging fields such as genomics, synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, and climate science. Without strong knowledge of basic research or fundamental research, technological solutions are risks of being superficial and not very much applicable. It is either to concentrate on applied sciences, but then if you want to have the full ownership, you need to have a strong fundamental research. Second point, which is very obvious, is that fundamental research is the foundation for local manufacturing of vaccines, medicine, and health technologies. Local production of vaccines, diagnostics, and medical and medicine requires not only access to manufacturing technologies, but also a deep understanding of the science behind them. Fundamental research provides critical insight into pathogens biology, immunological mechanism, molecular interactions, and even the production platforms. This knowledge underpins or is the basis for product development processes such as antigen discovery and antigen selection, vaccine formulation, adjuvant design, and quality control. It is also the basis for the production of drug substance. We all agree that while fill and finish can provide an immediate solution during epidemics, is not the most sustainable approach. If you want to own the manufacturing and you want to own the technology, you have to start from the very basis. Local manufacturing of vaccines and medicine cannot truly be local if we are not producing the antigens locally and we are not producing the drug substances locally. Without these competencies, as I mentioned, Africa's push for health sovereignty or independence, including the initiatives that Africa CDC is spearheading, the Partnership for Health Product Manufacturing, will remain limited to only fill and finish operations and external dependency. The next point is ownership of innovation and intellectual property. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to have the ownership of your vaccine or your medicine that you are manufacturing, you should be producing the antigens, you should be producing the drug substances, and you can only do that with strong, basic, or fundamental science. Nations that invest in basic science are better positioned to create original technologies and claim intellectual property rights. We all know how much it costs for a technology transfer. Again, this issue of ownership of innovation and intellectual property, it confers both strategic and economic advantage, enabling countries to license products, generate revenue, and build technology-based enterprises. In Africa, increasing investment in fundamental research is crucial. We need to have a paradigm shift from consumer creators of knowledge and to a more strengthened ownership and autonomy over scientific innovation and discoveries. Next point is that it enhances or it catalyzes medical discoveries. As I mentioned earlier, medical discoveries start from the basis, and that is the fundamental research. Many global health R&D pipelines neglect diseases that disproportionately affect low-income countries. And Africa-led fundamental research is more likely to prioritize these areas and generate solutions that are context-specific and tailored to the African peculiarities. The next point is it enhances tech transfer and adaptation of imported technologies. Now, even the technology transfer, the success of technology transfer depends largely on the absorptive capacity of the recipient institutions, which in turn depend on their foundational or basic scientific knowledge. So basic research enables scientists to adapt, modify, and improve imported technologies to suit local context. Without that, you have a limited flexibility and ownership of even the transferred technology. Another point is enhancing or developing a skilled workforce for the biopharmaceutical and medtech sector. It is with the fundamental research such as universities and national laboratories that provide a pipeline for training scientists and technicians. And these professionals are key for the growth of biomanufacturing, regulatory science, and innovation-driven industries. And some countries in Africa, which have largely strong basic science institutions, have been more successful in building advanced health technologies and R&D platforms. This is quite obvious. Basic science also stimulates innovation-driven industrialization. Now, the Africa Union's Agenda 2063 and the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy Africa 2024, they both emphasize the role of science and innovation in structural transformation. And fundamental research supports industrial innovation, not only in health, but also in quite many other sectors. And that is why it is key for sustainable development and economic empowerment. It enables the development of new products, as I mentioned earlier, new processes, and also services that can diversify economy and reduce dependence on exported commodities. Last point is strengthening health system resilience and pandemic preparedness. Fundamental research, we know it enhances capacity to predict, to detect, and to respond to emerging health threats. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, countries with strong basic science infrastructure were able to rapidly sequence viral genomes, model the disease spread, and participate in vaccine development. Therefore, strengthening Africa's capabilities in immunology, virology, epidemiology, regulatory affairs, vaccinology, microbiology, and all these basic sciences is a very key area that we need to invest. They are more likely to get funding and money for clinical trials. But if you are only conducting clinical trials, you don't own that discovery. And you are missing that pipeline in the R&D ecosystem. Now, what are the challenges of the fundamental research in Africa, these are very obvious. The first one is inadequate and inconsistent funding. Only about 0.42% of Africa's GDP on average is being allocated into R&D compared to the global average. African Union advocate allocating at least 1% of the national GDP into R&D, but this is not very much obtainable in majority of member states in Africa. Another initiative by the AU is to allocate 2% of the health-related budget into health-related R&D. This one is also not happening. And this is really impact negatively on the ability to conduct good fundamental research. Now, even the amount of money or the fund that is being allocated into R&D, it is a very small fraction of these that goes to fundamental science. We know mostly it goes into the applied sciences. Another issue is the issue of brain drain. This is due to limited research opportunities. Even when you train scientists in vaccinology, in immunology, in molecular biology, you need to provide the opportunities for them and the enabling environment for them to stay. Otherwise, you will be creating workforce for another continent. Now, in terms of that funding, let me give you an example before we continue discussion around the brain drain. The country in Africa with the biggest budget, the budget of that country is less than the annual budget of National Institute of Health in the US. So you can imagine the investment. An institution that is into research is receiving more funding than the entire annual budget of a member state in Africa with the highest annual budgetary allocation. Going back to the issue of brain drain, as I mentioned earlier, you'll be producing scientists, pharmacists, doctors, biochemists, immunologists, but they will be moving out to another continent because the opportunities are not there or the enabling environment. One of the member states in Africa with a good number of doctors, there are more doctors from that member state in America than the entire doctors in that particular country because it's a cheap labor. So this persistent brain drain weakens local institutions, reduces mentorship opportunities for early career researchers, and limits Africa's ability to retain the critical mass of scientific expertise needed for sustained innovation. Other issue, which is a challenge, is fragmented research ecosystem. Africa research landscape is often fragmented with limited coordination among the universities and national laboratories and research councils. I recall when I did my MSc at the University of Aberdeen in clinical pharmacology, surprisingly, majority of the teachers were not based in Aberdeen. Some are coming from other universities and some are coming from industry. And the University of Aberdeen is named as one of the best institutions for clinical pharmacology in the UK. But more than half of the workforce are from other universities and pharmaceutical companies. Now that is coordination. You cannot have it all in Nigeria. You cannot have it all in Rwanda. You cannot have it all in Ethiopia. You cannot have it all in any of the member states. But our ability to coordinate and harness and leverage the expertise we have and the available resources is what will improve the entire ecosystem. When I was doing my PhD at the University of Manchester, I recall we have a very good vaccine engineering platform. But in terms of testing the immunogenicity of the vaccines after producing, the platform they have at the University of Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine and the University of Oxford are superior than what we have at the University of Manchester. So it was very logical and very easy for us to collaborate. We engineer the vaccine in Manchester and we do the immunogenicity assessment at the University of Liverpool and at the University of Oxford. And that partnership continues up to today. We need to have this form of arrangement in Africa. I happen to interact with some researchers from Nigeria and Ghana. I realized similar scenario. One institution, they are very good in vaccine engineering, but the immunogenicity assessment in Ghana is superior. So Ghana and Nigeria are just across borders. For example, we need to have that across-border collaboration. Another issue is limited private sector engagement. Now, this is something that we really need to do more. The private sector in Africa invests minimally in R&D, especially in the fundamental research, as I mentioned earlier. They do invest at times in clinical trials and even the funding aid we have from institutions, from other governments. They prefer clinical trials because after clinical trials, you start making money. But fundamental research is the cornerstone for the innovation. It's a long process, but it's more sustainable. It will give you that sense of ownership. Now, the lack of university-industry partnership definitely weakens innovation policies and perceived high risk discourage private sector from supporting basic science. That is why we need the initial funding to come from the government. Government should give that initial push so that the perceived risk by these actors, which are private sector, can be reduced. Or to have an arrangement like what is happening in the UK at the moment. The European Union is taking some of the risk of institutions and small pharmaceutical companies that are willing to invest, for example, in Africa and in basic sciences. As a result, in Africa, promising discoveries often fail to move beyond academic journals. Into commercial application. We need to do more in translational research. How do we translate from bed to bedside? We have a lot of good findings, good discoveries, but they don't move beyond the academic journals. We need to put a lot of emphasis on translational research. But we need to have quality research also. The issue of putting emphasis on numbers, I have 50 publication, I have 100 publication, is not the priority. Out of the 100 publication you have, how many IP do you have? How many patents do you have? How many products? How many of your work that inform policy changes or treatment guidelines? This is the kind of impact that we should be looking, not just counting numbers. Another point, which is a challenge, is over-reliance of external research agendas. I mean, significant proportion of fundamental research in Africa at times are externally funded and often align with donor priorities rather than the national or regional needs. I mean, while the international collaboration is good, it's valuable, overdependence on external agendas can lead to misalignment and I mean, between the research output and the local development challenges, it might not be context specific that we are looking for. This also limits Africa's agency in setting and implementing its own scientific priorities. I recall there was a time I worked for an institution. They provided a lot of money for COVID during that time. And a lot of member states in Africa felt that COVID is no longer a priority at that point. But then there was a lot of money for COVID. And you cannot use that money for priority diseases in the continent. Now, let us look at strategic recommendations. What do we do to strengthen basic science in the African continent? I think from the problems or challenges we have discussed, it's very easy to extrapolate what we need to do. We need to increase domestic investment in R&D. Government must progressively increase public spending on R&D to at least 1% of the GDP. And the 2% of the health-related budget into the health-related R&D. I think these are very good initiative. Another issue is to establish support and establish and support regional research hubs. We need to support our regional centers for excellence, create a well-defined funding for these centers of excellence, focus on the frontier basic science areas such as genomics, immunology, pharmacology, and a lot of other fundamental sciences. Another issue is we need to strengthen policy and institutional framework. We need to adopt a national research strategies that integrate fundamental research into broader science, technology, and innovation. Industrial and health development plan. As I mentioned earlier, even the money that is being allocated into research, mostly very limited amount goes into fundamental research. We need to support research training and rotation, adopt a national research strategies, and also develop innovation ecosystem that support retention, provide opportunities for our trained scientists to stay back in Africa. Mentorship and mentee is a well successful approach that worked very well in the US. National Institute of Health is a very good example where you have a strong mentor-mentee arrangement for scientists. You hardly see a lower career scientist in the US that is not having a mentor. And that is quite a very good thing that we need to adopt. Leveraging South-South and global partnerships. We need to promote collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, across the borders within Africa. We are not collaborating as we should be doing, and also collaborating with other institutions across the continent, as long as it is mutually beneficial partnerships. The last one is to empower African research leadership. This is another area that we really need to do. It enables African scientists to lead regional and global research consortia, ensuring that research priorities reflect Africa's need. Africa CDC is currently working on assessing research capacities and capability of research institutions, and also supporting member states to develop their research priorities. The activities are currently going on in Ghana and Togo as a pilot, with hope that these will be conducted in other African countries. We need to know our strengths. We need to know which institution is doing what to enhance that across-border collaboration. And also we need to have a national research priorities, which will now collate into regional research priorities, and which will collate into continental research priorities. In conclusion, fundamental research is indispensable for building Africa's innovation capacity, achieving scientific sovereignty, and supporting long-term sustainable development. It serves as the foundation for medical discoveries, local manufacturing of health technologies, ownership of intellectual property, and the development of skilled human capital. While current investment and infrastructure remain inefficient, a strategic shift towards supporting basic science can unlock transformative potential for health, economic, and technological resilience across the continent. Africa's future as a knowledge-based economy depends on recognizing and resourcing fundamental research as a core pillar of its development agenda. With this, I say thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, sir. We are delighted to receive your submission on the current state of fundamental research in Africa. And on behalf of the entire team at Install Africa, we are delighted to understand the challenges that we are currently battled with, the solutions that are being currently promoted to relieve us of all these challenges, as well as future perspective that would assist in living up to the expectation as a feeder continent. It is important to note that currently the world is facing a lot of challenges, and that standing alone as an independent continent is key in ensuring that we utilize all the necessary facilities that we have in conjunction with all our friends and colleagues across the globe. And Dr. Jubril had also successfully informed us that the role of fundamental research in innovation for capacity development in Africa cannot be overemphasized. During the lecture, he informed us of the need that fundamental research is key and is the bedrock of development, particularly in health and biopharmaceuticals. Having identified all the challenges and also giving us solutions, it is important that as individuals, as group, and as a continent, every nation should prioritize our health needs in relation to what could provide solution to the population, bearing in mind that a lot of promotion are needed in ensuring that what we have currently is strengthened to ensure that we'll be able to meet up with various challenges that would confront our continent. We have the skill, we have the manpower, we have the technical know-how, as we are supportive of every other continent and nation in the world. So hence the need for us to pull all our strengths together and then work with all our partners to ensure that we fund more fundamental research and to ensure that the population and health of the African continent are taken care of. So on this note, I would like to invite us for discussion. The floor is open. You are free to collaborate, to contribute, make your contributions known, and then seek clarification where could be necessary. Thank you. Yeah, the floor is open for us to discuss. So while waiting for participants to hear their view, so I would like to ask Dr. Jubril, um, what was the response of the African CDC to some of the emerging challenges we have recently, particularly in Uganda, in Congo, and a few other states with Ebola, monkeypox, and the likes, and how best are we prepared using the African-based healthcare professional data to respond to newer health challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As rightly mentioned, Africa CDC under Science and Innovation Directorate, part of the current project R&D includes R&D during epidemics and pandemic. So that means for any of these diseases, Marburg, Mpox, Lassa fever, Africa CDC is supporting any activity across the R&D ecosystem. I recall in DRC, Africa CDC supported clinical trials on remdesivir. And currently, I think there is a discussion for another clinical trials between Rwanda and another company and Africa for a vaccine that is meant for mpox. And also, Africa CDC is working with some funding agencies to see how to support basic research, but there are going to be a selection criteria. If you have a research institution or a researcher that was able to, let's say, develop an antigen for a vaccine or produce a drug substance, then Africa CDC is working and discussing on how to support these African scientists in translating these basic discovery into at least first in human study. As I mentioned earlier, we do have researchers, but most of these researchers are limited to academic journals. We are not moving them forward. As I mentioned, we need that initial push by government, by agencies, by institutions like Africa CDC, and also through public-private partnership. But as we mentioned earlier, the perceived risk is what is pushing pharmaceutical sector. But with the initial push by the government, pharmaceutical industries are more likely to collaborate with academic institutions. Or if Africa can do a similar arrangement, as I mentioned, that is happening in the UK, with the government taking some of the risk, or government giving some incentive to pharmaceutical companies that agrees to collaborate with academic institution, like a sort of tax exemption and other ways of incentive. And the Africa CDC is now currently working to develop Africa blueprint on translational research. How do we really encourage Africa researchers that are into basic science? How to empower them? The moment you start empowering people that are doing very good research, you are also encouraging innovation across the continent. So this is why, as I mentioned earlier, we are currently in Ghana and Togo. I'm now in Ghana. We are assessing research capacity of academic institutions in Ghana and in Togo, and also working with the relevant stakeholders from this country to identify their research priorities. And this activity is going to be conducted in all the African member states. And that would inform how do we collaborate, how do we address some of these gaps, and how do we improve, and how do we advocate at high level for R&D funding. Because a lot of time, our head of states and ministers will, during AU meeting, agree to certain amount of funding. But I believe with high-level advocacy, we might be able to start making those pledges reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. There's a chat here. You mentioned the challenge of underfunding in African research. What specific steps can African government and private sector entities take to increase investment in R&D, and how can international partnership help address this gap? Thank you.
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we know fundamental research doesn't just generate immediate money like clinical trials. After phase 3 clinical trials, you have the marketing and what have you, and then you start making money. For fundamental research, government need to see that. We need high-level advocacy to convince government that this is an investment. It's an investment for sustainable development. It's an investment for economic empowerment. And you start seeing impact, not immediately, but it's something that will drive the entire country into improve healthcare innovation and also discovery. Other things are suggested. I don't know how we are going to work on that, is working with the big industries in Africa, like those that into drilling, oil drilling, mining, and other big industries, to directly work and collaborate with the academic institutions or regional center for excellence in coordination with the Africa CDC to be funding research at their part of corporate social responsibility. This arrangement is being done in other parts of the world. I think it's something that we can replicate. Another thing that is being suggested is, under policy issue, is how do you encourage pharmaceutical company to collaborate with academic institutions? One, we need to improve the quality of our research, as I mentioned earlier, to attract collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry. If you're conducting quality research, you are more likely to collaborate, to have collaboration that can move your science forward. It is a win-win arrangement. The pharmaceutical companies, they need the academic institutions, because that is where you have innovation, that is where you have discoveries. Pharmaceutical companies and other, they have the technology to make that discovery into a product. They also have the money, they have the expertise, and they have the experience. So it is a win-win arrangement that is working very well in Europe and America. I recall before I left UK, somebody that is into immunology research and vaccine research, it was clearly written under his profile that I'm not accepting grant until after 2026. So because the unit is conducting high quality research with the potential to bring solution, they are not counting numbers. They are not counting number of publications per year. They are counting number of real scientific discoveries. And this paradigm shift is what we also need to inculcate in our academic institutions. As part of policy, as I mentioned earlier, is government providing some buffer to decrease the risk of this pharmaceutical, or to absorb the risks, some of the risks of this pharmaceutical company. Another area is issue of there are institutions across the globe that are willing to work and collaborate with Africa in providing loan. But we need to be very careful with loan. You have to have a credible and quality research before you use loan to move your research forward. Because ultimately, you are going to pay back that money. I think basically these are some of the points, and these are some of the areas. Funding from the government, funding from other institutions, and joint grant application. Recently, EDTCP advertised for funding, and they do give funding up to 5 million euro and more, but you need to have a research consortium. For example, Rwanda, an institution from Rwanda working with another institution in Kenya, Ethiopia, and then finding another European institution to create a consortium. You could be able to access grant up to the tune of 5 million euro and even more. So there are a number of opportunities that if we collaborate, if we form consortia, if we conduct research across borders, we are more likely to leverage our collective expertise, resources, and also give us more access to funding and grants and even more credibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. There's a question here about the role of students in fundamental research, and then how do you would also promote fundamental research? Thank you.
So the university, as I mentioned, it's still rotate around funding and policy. We need to have a policy that says these are the ways that we need to support fundamental research. We need a lot of high-level advocacy to the government for them to know that as long as we want to do this local manufacturing for vaccines, medicine, and health technology, we cannot do it and make it more sustainable, make it our own, without strong fundamental research. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot say local manufacturing is truly local if you are not producing the antigen locally and you are not producing the drug substance locally. Fill and finish is an immediate solution, but it's not the most sustainable approach. So we need this high-level advocacy to our head of states, to our ministers of health, to convince them that we need to do more in these fundamental sciences. Issue of policy, issue of improved funding, and also recognizing excellence. As I mentioned earlier, Africa CDC is trying to work with some institutions to identify researchers in Africa that have produced products. For example, they have discovered antigen to support them in conducting preclinical studies in animal models, and also supporting them into producing clinical trials, quality materials for first-in-human trials. These are activities or projects that are currently being discussed at the level of Africa CDT, that we really need to do more on translational research. By the time you start identifying these researchers and rewarding them in this way, it will encourage more to also try to do what others are doing. I mentioned issue around policy, issue around collaboration with pharmaceutical company, and basically these are some of the areas that we really need to work on. Yes, thank you.
of government to be able to address this challenge? Thank you.
I missed that.
Okay, so I was wondering that with the challenges of funding cut, particularly with reference to the USAID, United States Agency for International Development, the recent announcement by the US president and its effects on the African continent and every other region that benefit from USAID funding. So what happens if all this external funding support stops completely? EDCTP, Norwegian, Belgian, Swedish, and the likes. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I think that is why I mentioned funding from the government. If you look at all the countries that are doing very well, including even in Europe and America, they receive a lot of funding from the government. So we need to, as I mentioned earlier, we need high-level advocacy to convince our government that fundamental research is a priority for our health, vaccines, medicine, independence. As long as we want to improve and have ownership of this, we need to invest in fundamental research. As I mentioned earlier, even if you are doing tech transfer, you need knowledge of basic research to maintain and to be able to have some flexibility, to have the skills to modify, and even to handle the transferred technology. So we cannot do away with it, even if we are doing technology transfer. And the other area I mentioned is the issue of public-private partnership. As I mentioned, if we are conducting quality research, policy, that there is a policy on ground that encourage public-private partnership, more companies would be willing to collaborate with pharmaceutical company. We all have a role to play. The academic institution need to conduct quality research, not counting numbers of publication. And also the government need to provide the enabling environment by providing some funding and also by encouraging the pharmaceutical company to collaborate with the academic institution in a form of policy, in a form of incentive, and that arrangement is more likely to be more sustainable than relying on external funding. Another issue I mentioned, which the government need to give its own approval, is issue of utilizing big industries that are into mining, crude mining, uh, oil drilling, and other big companies in Africa to see supporting research as a sort of their part of their corporate social responsibility. In South Africa, they have the chairship in which a company or a bank will identify a researcher that is doing very well, let's say in immunology, and say we are going to give you a professorial chair, meaning they'll be providing funding for that research unit to support his research activity. It's something that we should encourage in other African countries, our banks, our other industries. If we can encourage them, each one to pick an area. Say, I will be a chair. This bank will be providing a chair in pharmacology. This one will be providing a chair in biochemistry. This one will be providing chair in immunology. I mean, it will encourage those researchers, and they will be having some funding to conduct quality research. This is what South Africa is doing, and I think we can replicate that in other African member states. Thank you. Okay, the issue of policy is still around fundamental research. There is something that is still under discussion that if possible, to recommend to pharmaceutical companies or big organizations that are conducting clinical trials in Africa that if you are conducting clinical trials, let's say for drug A or vaccine A in Africa, collaborate with an academic institution and build their capacity in preclinical research for that particular product. We are not trying to verify your preclinical data, but we are just trying to say you are conducting clinical trials for vaccine A or drug B. Then support capacity building in that area in preclinical research, even if you don't want to go down into the basic research. So it's something that it has to be probably as a policy that member states and Africa CDC can work with these institutions in seeing how possible we could do that. Another issue is the money that is being allocated by member state into the research. As I mentioned earlier, even that limited resources, very, very limited, is still going into basic sciences. Most of it go into applied sciences and other activities. So if we can have internal policy within the member state that this certain proportion of money that is meant for research should go into fundamental research, that policy measure would also improve funding into basic research. It's one issue to say we have allocated $5 million into research, and then out of that, maybe only 5% is going into basic research. That is where we need to also have some policy on how to apportion the money that is being allocated by the member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I would like to confirm if Mr. Emmanuel Munezero from NIRDA is on the call for the vote of thanks. Mr. Emmanuel, are you here? Okay. In the absence of, okay, he's not. Okay. In the absence of Mr. Emmanuel Munezero, on behalf of the Innovation, Science and Technology for Action and Learning in Africa, Install Africa, I would like to acknowledge and thank our guest facilitator, Dr. Murtala Jibril, for the very educative session today. We've actually learned a lot, starting from the challenges, stating the importance of fundamental research to discovery and innovation, as well as current efforts that is being made by the African CDC and heads of government and partners in advancing efforts in driving innovation in Africa. We are grateful, and within my mind, I feel that this session should not end this way. There should still be further efforts, particularly looking at the role of youths in bridging the gap as current scholars and future leaders. I remember a few days ago in Nigeria, the federal government launched Health Fellows Award, which is to have a research fellow and health research fellow in each ward of the country. And this is just part of efforts at driving innovation and health care delivery from and in every part of the country. So we wish that the Install Africa team would be able to put up another session, the progress that are being made as we advance the cause of humanity. On behalf of the team, once again, I'm Taufik Adegbega, a member of the Install Africa team. And we do hope to have you around in our next webinar session. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.